Well, this is really exciting. We are at a unique time in history. Things that people have been waiting for decades are about to happen. I myself, my life was transformed about 20 years ago when I first learned about this cover-up of UFOs, advanced technologies, extraterrestrial life. And I believed at the time that this would go mainstream very soon. That was back in 2001 in May. It didn't happen. 9/11 happened. And ever since, we've had barely a whisper about UFOs, extraterrestrial life in the media. Now, things are about to change in a really big way. And we are all part of that. Everyone that is participating in this webinar, we are going to witness something truly extraordinary. So buckle your seatbelts. We are going to go for a wild ride as we look at all the things that are happening. So let's begin with the slides that I have in this presentation for you. So we're going to be looking at the topic for today is how the deep state hides the truth about secret space programs and extraterrestrial life. What is being hidden and who is lying about what? Those are some of the things we're going to be covering. And I'm going to begin from a really critical time in our history, which was the Second World War era, because a lot of what has transpired since owes its origins to the people and the thinking that established the system that we are experiencing at the moment. So, what we have during the Second World War was the use of psychological operations, deception, as a means of being able to deceive the enemy, to manipulate public opinion, to be able to achieve your desired outcome in the war. And no one really put it better than the Prime Minister of the United Kingdom, Winston Churchill, when he said, "In wartime, truth is so precious that she should always be attended by a bodyguard of lies." So that really summarizes the official position during a time of war, where authorities regard the truth as something that is going to be decisive. Whether you win the war or lose the war is how well you are able to hide the truth. And of course, we know that probably one of the biggest campaigns, the Normandy landings, was part of this deception strategy. So Churchill really laid the foundations for that. And all of the major powers, all major countries understood this. They knew that you had to hide things. It wasn't really from the general public. And this is one of the things we really need to emphasize here, because those of us involved in the UFO field think, well, the deception is all about us, all about me. It's kind of like, it's like this is the way a lot of people think. It's about me, it's about deceiving us. But really, we are just a side effect. Really, it's about how do you deceive your opponents in a wartime situation. And during the Second World War, it was followed very quickly by the Cold War. And while these three gentlemen, the leaders of the United Kingdom, of the United States, and the Soviet Union were all wartime allies, soon after the end of World War II, a new Cold War happened. And this was where all three sides were using deception against one another, trying to make the other think in a certain way. And this is very important when we consider the UFO issue, because it wasn't just a matter of hiding the truth about UFOs from us, the general public. It was making sure that your adversaries, your major adversaries, didn't know what you knew, that you were hiding from them the truth. And there was also another Cold War beginning, and that was way down south. Go further south than Australia, where I'm from. You've got to go all the way down to Antarctica, and this is where you have the breakaway group of Germans that established a colony down there during the Second World War. And the Allied powers knew this. They were aware of what the Germans had done, and they knew that the Germans had advanced technologies. So this was also another aspect of this campaign of hiding the truth through a bodyguard of lies, of like making it seem as though the World War II had come to an end, Nazi Germany had been defeated, and that's the end of the story. Well, it wasn't, because what was happening in Antarctica was a continuation of something that emerged during the Second World War. So let me move over now to the next slide, and this is something that was happening. All the major powers were in this race to acquire advanced aerospace technologies. All the major nations, the United States, the Soviet Union, Britain, France, Canada, Australia, they knew or quickly learned that Nazi Germany had achieved remarkable breakthroughs in reverse engineering and building flying saucer craft. There were as many as 30 different flying saucer prototypes that were being developed by Nazi Germany during the Second World War. Now, the successful prototypes that were built by major German corporations, those were the ones that were transported down to Antarctica as the backbone for an Antarctic space program that would be headed by the Germans. The unsuccessful prototypes that were built by companies that didn't win the contracts because the prototypes were deficient, those were the ones that the Americans, the British, and the Soviets found. And they are the ones that we subsequently learned from in various major news reports after the Second World War. So those flying saucer prototypes were very real, and the Allies knew that this technology was something that the Germans had made great progress in, and that it involved extraterrestrials, because many of these craft either were acquired from an extraterrestrial civilization or were crash retrievals. And of course, some of the prototypes were just German reverse engineered copies of these. Now, we know that this was something that took up a lot of attention for all the major countries, especially in the United States. There's the Special Operations Manual 101, and that was a manual for the recovery of extraterrestrial entities and technologies. That these were things that were happening around the world, and so there were covert teams set up to go to remote areas, whether it was in the United States or whether it was in the Pacific or whether it was in Europe, wherever the United States and its allies had some kind of influence, a presence. This is where these crash retrieval operations were conducted. So you have secret teams going all over the planet. Now, this manual is something that was leaked. It's a so-called Majestic document, which is a document that appears to be official and genuine, but it's never been acknowledged by government by the United States authorities as genuine. But nevertheless, it's been leaked, and we've had forensic analysis conducted on these documents. People like Dr. Robert Wood and his son Ryan have really been pioneers in authenticating these documents. And that is very important because it shows that these documents, even though they haven't been officially acknowledged, have all the earmarks of official documentation at the time. So really you can take it to the bank that a lot of these documents, including this one, the SOM 101, are authentic, and it describes the practices that were put in place to retrieve extraterrestrial craft and the teams, the covert teams that were set up. And this was not something that was just unique to the United States. The Soviet Union had their own crash retrieval teams. They had their teams, their operations operating out of a place near Stalingrad called Kapustin Yar, and they had their crash retrieval teams operating from there because the Soviet Union is a vast territory, and so they were bringing crashed craft there to Kapustin Yar for study in reverse engineering. And the United States was doing the same. Britain, working through its allies, Canada and Australia, both of which have vast territories. Again, you have crashed craft, and these are being recovered. So let me move over here again to the other camera. So what are the goals of the deception programs? Well, one of the goals is hiding the truth from foreign governments and militaries. And a really good example of this is Chairman Mao of China. He believed that UFOs were a Western trick. That it was like, he believed that the UFO phenomenon was something that the United States and its allies were promoting to try and trick China into spending its scarce resources on these dead-end programs of reverse engineering alleged flying saucer craft, or trying to reverse engineer something that was, in Mao's eyes, impossible. So there you have an example of governments believing that what we consider to be reports, genuine reports of UFO sightings, UFO crashes, that this is something that governments might believe to be part of a deception program with an ulterior motive. The other layer, the other goal of a deception program is to hide the truth from elected officials and military officials who don't have need-to-know access. And need-to-know access is something in the classified world where regardless of whatever security clearance you have, whether it's confidential, secret, top secret, or Q clearance, and all the different countries have their own systems of classification like that. But on top of that, you have this compartmentalization process where there might be a classified program where you need both top secret security clearance as well as codeword access. So for example, MAGIC was one of the codeword access to the program dealing with extraterrestrial life and technologies. So if you have a top secret security clearance, you have Q clearance to know about nuclear secrets, and maybe you have access to various programs that are in your field of specialty. If you're in the military, if you're in government service, if you don't have MAGIC codeword clearance, then you don't have need to know. And even if you have MAGIC codeword clearance, you still need to justify need to know. So it gives you an idea of how the compartmentalization process works. And this is a very effective way of hiding the truth from people within the military and government service, because those who don't have need to know, one, they're not supposed to ask about it, and those who do have need to know security clearance, you need to go with a cover story. You need to tell a lie. I mean, that's what a cover story is. A cover story is a lie. And if you're given security clearance or covert access to one of these compartmentalized programs dealing with UFOs and extraterrestrial life, you are obligated under law in the United States, and other countries would be the same, to promote a cover story, and which is an officially sanctioned lie that deflects people from whatever program that exists. And then you have the third level of a deception program, which is hiding the truth from the general public, from us. And that's something we are all very familiar with, because we've heard many stories, we've seen many sightings, we've seen investigations that have been very slipshod and unprofessional, and yet this has been sold to us as the truth of what's going on. Project Blue Book is probably the best example. I mean, that really was just a government-sanctioned deception program to hide the truth from the general public, making us think that the Air Force was really conducting a thorough investigation, whereas all they were doing was just gathering up information from the public concerning UFO sightings, siphoning sightings that had national security significance to a program that was set up for that, and those sightings that didn't have any national security significance, they were just channeled off into Project Blue Book. So Richard Hoagland, he is a long-time UFO researcher, someone who I first came across back around 2001, 2002 when I got interested in this phenomenon. And one of the phrases he's most well known for is saying, the lie is different at every level. So that's really what we're dealing with here. So how does this work? Well, thankfully there are some documents that give us an idea of this. This is how core secrets are hidden. They're kept. And this is a slide that came through one of the NSA documents that Edward Snowden leaked a few years back. And so this is how the secrets are hidden. So you have an umbrella program, a Sentry Eagle. This is the rubric for the idea that you hide your most sensitive, your most highly classified secrets under less classified secrets. And this is something that this slide encapsulates. It shows us here you have, for the NSA, what you have, Sentry Eagle involves non-exceptionally compartmented information programs, so that in the NSA system, exceptionally compartmented information is like it's not so sensitive, but underneath that you have all of these exceptionally compartmented information programs, ECI programs, and those are the most sensitive. So this gives you an idea of how the secrets are kept within the government system. And this is something that was actually pioneered by the Germans during the Second World War, and the Allies just followed up with that, and the Soviets did the same. It's a very logical system. And how does it work? Well, I'll give you an example of how it works. So you have this operating at Area 51. You have these different levels of secrecy where you have, for example, some top secret aerospace program where you have Groom Lake, you have a company like Lockheed Martin, its Skunk Works, building new generation spy planes. I mean, we know that Lockheed built the U-2 and the SR-71 at Area 51. Lockheed was also working on another program called the Aurora Project, and they built these craft that were able to reach hypersonic speeds, Mach 5 and above, called the SR-74 and the SR-75. These were the replacements for the SR-71. So according to various sources, one of the sources that I think is most credible is Edgar Fouché. He did a really good expose of the Aurora Project at Area 51 back around 1999. You can find it on the internet, Edgar Fouché. And he described how it worked, that you would have the SR-75, which would be the bigger plane. It would reach a speed of Mach 5 at I think like 100,000 feet. And then the SR-74 would launch it would piggyback on the SR-75, and it would launch up and was able to achieve escape velocity of I think it's 24,000 miles per hour. And so that was a craft that was essentially a spacecraft. But this was using scramjets and jet propulsion technologies, very advanced technologies from what is currently known today. So this is clearly a top secret compartmentalized program that was occurring at Area 51 at Groom Lake. But this was a very effective cover for an even more secretive program occurring in Area 51, which was the development of these anti-gravity craft using these principles of torsion field physics, where if you rotate plasma at a very high pressure, at above 60,000 revolutions per minute, you would begin to generate an anti-gravity effect. And you could have the mass of an object like the TR3B, this triangular shaped object. According to Edgar Fouché, once you had the torsion field being created, it would reduce the mass of that craft by approximately 87%. So that meant that the craft would almost seem to defy the laws of inertia, because once you reduce the mass by 87%, it could accelerate much more quickly. It could do right-hand turns without crashing the occupants, who normally, through the laws of inertia, would smash into the wall, but now they could just stay in the craft if it did a right-hand turn, and a seatbelt or harness would keep them in place without them being crushed. So you would have this torsion field physics operating in this craft. You would have, say, conventional engines that would be able to provide the thrust. And so this was a craft that was operational in the late 1980s, and Edgar Fouché identified that this was actually housed at the S4 facility at Area 51, which was at Papoose Lake. So what we have here is a really very advanced aerospace vehicle, the TR3B, that would be using these advanced torsion field physics that that were revolutionary, as opposed to the less classified but still very sensitive Aurora Project using scramjets and jet propulsion technologies, what is known to science. So that's how you hide a secret, because if someone, for example, a congressman or a general, hears about these TR3Bs operating at Area 51, they'll be told that no, that's just a government-sanctioned deception program. That's not real. We're just fooling the public into believing UFOs are extraterrestrials. We're actually behind that. I mean, the CIA actually did say this. And they'll say with all sincerity that the real secret at Area 51 is this. This is what we're covering up. But that, as we know from the Century Eagle program, the Aurora Project was the cover for the more sensitive S4 programs involving anti-gravity, torsion field physics, and the reverse engineering of extraterrestrial craft that were happening there. So who controls the UFO secrets? Who controls information about extraterrestrial life? Now, I'm sure many of you have heard about the alleged group Majestic 12. This is how it looked back in 1947, according to the leaked Eisenhower briefing document, which for the first time revealed the existence of this secretive group that people had suspected was in control. But until that document leaked in, I think it was 1984, people didn't know who was involved in that. But in 1984, that all changed when people began to research it, and I believe it was 1987 that Timothy Good published this list in his famous book Above Top Secret. So this is the lineup of ministers or people, officials, and very heavy representation. You can see 4 very senior military officials, generals, admirals. Then you had another 4 people that were intelligence, in the part of the intelligence world. And then you had another 4 people that were part of the scientific community. So that's a kind of a breakdown which makes a lot of sense. You have your military, you have your people involved in the national security, covert operations side of things, and then you have your scientists. That kind of ratio would be something we would expect that Majestic 12 would continue to possess. Now I just want to mention, emphasize the third person at the top there, James Forrestal, who was the Secretary of the Navy, and also later he became in 1947 the Secretary of Defense. So I'll be referring to him pretty soon because this issue of who was keeping the secrecy and Majestic 12 making the decisions and enforcing the secrecy system, even amongst Majestic 12 members. So I'll talk about that. Well, how do we know the Majestic 12 group existed? People always say, well, what's the evidence? Is there any hard evidence substantiating this? Well, we know that there's a document. It's called the Cutler, Twining-Cutler memo, and it basically says it's about a change in the schedule for a meeting of the Majestic 12 Special Studies Project. And here you have a message being sent out by Robert Cutler, Special Assistant to President Eisenhower, to other members of the Majestic 12 group, basically saying on July 14, 1954, that the scheduled meeting for Majestic 12 would have to be rescheduled. So this was a document that was discovered in the National Archives by UFO researcher Stanton Friedman, and it's acknowledged by the National Archives to be a genuine government document, at least something that the National Archives possessed, had in its catalogue of official government documents. When the National Archives were questioned about these documents and its provenance, there was an attempt to kind of like backtrack and say, well, we don't know where this document came from. It just suddenly appeared in there. And implying that, well, maybe there was some sort of funny business going on. But no, it is a National Archives document that was confirmed by UFO researchers who found it in the National Archives. So now what we're going to have is an idea of the Majestic 12 and Deep State hierarchy.